All right. From the origins of Winwood Radio to what is very possibly, folks, very soon wrapping up sponsorship. Sounds like here in the next few weeks to 7:50 a.m. Salem Media, San Diego. Discussions of truth, coast to coast, Miami to San Diego. So that is likely unfolding here soon. Ian Trottier with you, of course. Um, Today's guest, uh, this is like beyond insanity, folks. 5.5 years I've been doing this program, and the deep state, no more lies, freedom reserve, no more lies, coming out Trine Day here in a matter of weeks, I suspect. Manuscripts. I've had the contractual agreement, the book agreement now for over 2.5 years, and I suspect manuscript has been released a couple weeks ago. I suspect it'll be going to print here very, very, very soon. And I expose and uncover my research for 5 years as to what I believe the deep state is, and I'm absolutely positive I know what I'm talking about, folks. Cross check it, cross examine it. There's a lot of different factors going on to realizing the reins, if you will, the strings that pull the deep state, that operate the deep state. But what is most important is that the deep state is not American. This is a European banking cartel, and they have their hand around Lady Liberty's throat and choking the constitutional life right out of her. Unfortunately, it seems that maybe half, certainly a quarter, people in California and New York, a quarter of America is letting that life get sucked right out of her. That means once there is no more Constitution, once these rights, I mean, I'm talking to somebody yesterday in California and complaining that the not only U.S. but the California Constitution, which was once a republic, is not being honored. Remember, these are Lone Star states such as Texas, California, Arizona. So anyway, the fact that there is a what is otherwise known as an Orwellian Ministry of Defense, a Department of Disinformation. Are you kidding me? Under the Homeland Security, the Joe Biden regime. This is a Cuban-born Marxist leading that Homeland Security Department now under Joseph Biden. Folks, it's beyond insanity. You need to raise your voice. You need to make your opinion heard now, or else your republic will be lost. I would suspect within 10 years it'll be gone. The United States of America will be absorbed into the United Nations, somehow into some type of a North American conglomerate. I mean, it kind of already is through NAFTA, North American Free Trade Agreement, in a sense, under the Clinton administration. But I suspect that the way that Americans are waking up now, and the way that the others are just totally going along and sleeping and being completely complacent, like numb, totally numb to the fact that their country has been invaded. This is what I'm trying to get across. So let's not allow Charlotte to remain holding or standing by anyway. Follow the pipelines, uncovering the mystery of a lost spy and the deadly politics of the great game for oil. Charlotte Dennett joining us here momentarily. Going to bring her on. Naomi Wolf quote says that it's a completely eye-opening and unforgettable book. And then two quotes that caught my eye. A Russ Baker quote in regards to this work that we talk about today. Charlotte Dennett has a fascinating personal saga to share and mystery to solve. This book offers the hidden backstory to the history of U.S. involvement in the Middle East. It is the type of broad and deep historical dig that is badly needed, and it helps us see the bigger picture behind policies and failures that affect us today. Suddenly, all these wars make sense, says former guest of Discuss Your Truth, former guest of mine, Russ Baker, author of The Family of Secrets. And then also something that grabbed my eye is Ray McGovern had a quote here about Charlotte's work. A mix of curiosity and loyalty of family and country drove Charlotte Dennett to find out if the humanness ascribed to her spymaster father by his Harvard professor could have persisted in the dog eat dog espionage surrounding post World War II access to Middle East oil. She found abundant material to answer that question and many others about the early death of her father and about the origin of the endless wars that have come to characterize the region he loved. We are gifted with an intriguing personal account of the great game for oil and its countless and continuing casualties. Ray McGovern, co-founder, veteran intelligence professionals for sanity. So, again, I believe he served 27 years in the CIA. The former CIA analyst, former guest on the program. So we're going to bring on Charlotte right now, as I suspect she is standing by very patiently. We'll bring her into and onto discussions of truth. And folks, I thank you for listening. And please, you can pre-order No More Lies, Freedom Reserved. You can pre-order that right now. Books a million. And you want a signed copy, you can go to my website, iantrottier.com. When they go to print, because they're not in print yet. So this is Charlotte Dennett. I see she called 20 minutes ago, but unless I've got the I got the time wrong. Okay. Nope, I got it at 5:15. That's when I usually go. Here she is. Okay. Charlotte Dennett. Charlotte, Ian Trottier here. Welcome to Discussion of Truth. How are you?
Oh, I'm fine. A little late.
Yes, a little late here. I'm looking through our email, and it looks like you probably were ready to go at 5 o'clock, and I had it down at 5:15. So hopefully you've got a few.
Well, that's true. 5:15, so that's better, but I'm still a little late. I'm here. I
Good.
can do it.
Good. Let's go.
Okay.
Charlotte, there are two quotes. There are two quotes as I'm looking through who has contributed with a review of your work, and of course Naomi Wolf is a quote that stands out in my mind, but I've not met her or spoken with her. But the two people that I have had on my program and that I have spoken with are Russ Baker and Ray McGovern.
Oh yeah, sure thing.
And Ray, both of them are fascinating individuals. But Ray, I've actually written my own book, and I've quoted Ray in that book because I think for a man that did what he did, and I want you to talk about your father and what you've uncovered about your father's death. But I think what Ray has done over the course of the past quarter century, if not more now, standing up to the corruption in the Central Intelligence Agency is very bold. And in my view, it seems that Americans are waking up to the fact that, hey, their military has been used for other people's ill-thoughtness or ill intent. I don't know if you'd agree with that or not, but anyway, please make an introduction as to who you are, and we'll get into your book a little bit.
Well, that's fine, but we're on now. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. So who am I? Well, Time Magazine's called me a expert in resource-based politics. And what that means is I have a pretty in-depth knowledge of the role of oil and natural gas and pipelines in some of our major conflicts in the world. One area I focused on particularly is the Middle East, and I can show an oil and pipeline connection to the battles in Syria, Iraq, and Afghanistan. And then when this war started happening in the Ukraine, I did my rule of thumb. I followed the pipelines. And lo and behold, the Nord Stream 2 pipeline that was to give natural gas from Russia to Germany, the U.S. just stopped it from happening, sanctioned it, and that's sort of throwing things in havoc. And then I went even deeper and found out a lot about Ukraine. It has the second largest natural gas deposits in Europe, and the whole eastern section where the real hot battles are going on is where the most of the oil and gas reserves are, and including in the Black Sea, which is where Mariupol is, and where there's an effort to drive east along the Black Sea. So I consider this battle in Ukraine as a battle between super petropowers, the U.S. and Russia. That's the lens that I look through.
Well, that's great because that really echoes what I understood why Putin got involved in this in the first place. I tend to think that he probably would not have done this under the previous administration, but maybe he would have. I'm not sure exactly why the timing. Maybe you want to comment on that. Why do you think he's chosen this time now to strike?
Well, that's hard to say. I honestly can't say. I can say that if you follow a timeline, um, you could start as far back as 1992, which is when the Soviet Union dissolved. And there were negotiations that went on at that time between Russia and the U.S., and there was an agreement that okay, it would dissolve, and a lot of the former Soviet republics would become independent, but under the condition that would not NATO countries would not try to influence these new republics and would not move east 1 inch, and they violated that. Okay, so that pissed off the Russians and it pissed off Biden. I mean, not Biden, Putin. Then you go to 2014, and there was a coup that overthrew a pro-Russian president and installed a pro-Western one, and then eventually we get Zelensky. So there is evidence that Putin tried repeatedly to get written guarantees that the NATO would not militarize these countries and get close to his borders, and that was ignored. So at what point does he decide to go in? It may be because he said enough is enough. It could be because he was triggered, so to speak. In our country, they keep saying this is an unprovoked war. Well, I see it as provoked, quite frankly. And because, if you're right on the border and you've got all these missiles pointing at Russia, and there's no time for the Russians to react, especially if we're talking nuclear here. That would only be if the U.S. got involved. But nonetheless, Putin is concerned about his sovereignty. But his problem was he committed an act of aggression by invading. And so that turned a lot of people against him, understandably. And so we're in the mess that we're in, frankly. That's as much as I can tell you. I don't know what's in his head, but he should not be underestimated. He's an ex-KGB
Yeah,
guy, and he's a master at the great game.
yeah, he's a master chess player, right? And
Yeah, I call it the great game for oil, and now I'm calling it the great game for oil and gas.
uh huh. Uh, Really well said there, Charlotte. Let's get a little bit of history as to this is a topic of passion for you. I sense, and I think it has to do with your father. Is that right?
You got it right. Yeah, and that's in the title too. Uncovering the mystery of a lost spy and the deadly politics of the great game for oil. My father was America's first master spy in the Middle East. He was stationed in Beirut, Lebanon, where I was born, in 1940, from 44 to 47. And his cover was cultural attaché because he was a scholar on the region. They plucked him right out of Harvard and sent him over there. But the thing is, he his last mission was to Saudi Arabia before his death. I was just an infant, but I've investigated it, and I wanted to know what was he doing in Saudi Arabia? What was that about? And because I was able to get his last report, his last letter home, and then I sued the CIA and got documents declassified. What I found out is his job was to determine the route of the Trans-Arabian pipeline, and I found this great article in New York Times as well, March 2, 1947, which goes into the whole geopolitics, the importance of this Saudi oil to the world. And what it was going to do was elevate the United States into superpower status, both in the Middle East and the world, because it was, the biggest reserves of oil. And at that time, well, it's still extremely important. Oil is the fuel of the military. It's something that is often missed in an analysis. So if you aspire to be a superpower, you have to be sure that you can secure enough supply of oil. So this pipeline, it was a huge thing at the time. I found out that America's former allies, the British and the French, and the Russians were all alarmed that the U.S. had this exclusive concession in oil-rich Saudi Arabia. They felt threatened by it. So that was a fascinating thing I discovered. And uh, the Russians were a new superpower as well. They wanted to get in, whereas the French and the English wanted to hold on to their um, their role in controlling that whole area. Anyway, long story short, he died in a plane crash headed for Ethiopia, where the U.S. had also gotten an exclusive oil concession, and again, much to the alarm of the British and the Russians. So I began to understand this great game, this power struggle, which usually is played very clandestinely. So you don't see it, you don't read about it in the press. But I was able to follow the pipelines, and I went all the way up to the endless wars in the Middle East and now Ukraine, and found out that the great game is going on right before our eyes. And I have predicted that if it continues, is going to be the mother of all energy wars, with very serious repercussions.
That's a lot to say. Now, the Keystone pipeline has been something of dispute. How do you feel about that?
Well, I understand that there's renewed efforts to get these once closed pipelines reopened and working again. And the XL Keystone is certainly one of them. I am of the position. I'm really, frankly, all for developing alternative energy.
Yep.
I think our dependence on oil
Yeah.
and natural gas is deadly. It's just deadly, and nothing proves it more than this horrific war in Ukraine. And I know that in Europe, the Europeans are redoubling their efforts to try to convert
Good. Yeah.
the sun and solar, solar and wind and some natural gas. Whereas in the U.S., it's all a huge hue and cry for drill, baby, drill again.
Right.
And that's going to have climate consequences, in my opinion.
Hmm.
I
Talk a
don't
little.
know what your opinion is.
Well, I I think the oil dependency must go, and I think it's partly designed by the powers that be in D.C. and primarily in Wall Street. But I'm a big advocate on relieving. But you're bringing up a good point in the military. The military is so dependent with their planes and that sort of thing, dependent on oil. So it is a big issue. But I want to, if you would, Charlotte, talk a little bit more about your father. Was your father killed? Excuse me, was he murdered?
I believe his plane was sabotaged. And the reason that I think that was, um, first of all, when I read the obituary as an adult starting to investigate, there were things in the obituary that were missing. It didn't even mention his trip to Saudi Arabia, and the official explanation was that he was on a vacation junket to Ethiopia. Well, I had his last report. It wasn't a vacation junket. He was there to explore more developing oil ties with Ethiopia, and I knew that. Well, I eventually found out when the plane crashed. I was able to get the accident report, and there was an aerial camera that was smashed. Well, that would have been to photograph pipeline routes. and there was highly sensitive telecommunications equipment on the plane, as well as the petroleum attache who was stationed in Cairo. So I knew this thing was all about oil, and the obituary was my first tip off. But eventually, I was able to attend a meeting of spooks, ex spooks, in Washington, D.C., and I was able to talk to one of the men who knew of my father, and what he told me is he said it was a terrible loss, and that was because of his huge knowledge of the region and their culture and their language. But then he added, and I suspect he had one wine too many. He said, "We always thought it was sabotage, but we couldn't prove it." So that was a moment of vindication for me, and I kept pursuing it. And it's all in the book. I put the pieces together, and I can say that I think I've proven the motive, and but I've not been able to prove who precisely. I'm pretty close to understanding um, who would have wanted this to happen, but not the individuals. Although I suspect, and I will add this, that the world's most famous double agent at the time, Kim Philby, may have been involved. And Kim Philby famously worked for the Americans, but also was working for the Russians. So anyway, that's a clue. It's a clue to why
It's a good one.
he might be involved, because both the Russians and the Americans didn't want the U.S. to be a rising power in the region. But there's more in the book. If you like mysteries, you would like to read Follow the Pipelines, I think. If you want to understand all these endless wars, I mean, some people
Yeah.
have said this is the book that finally explains it, because people are very confused about what's going on.
Yeah, Russ Baker, as a matter of fact, has said something along those lines. I want you to talk a little bit about what your chapter 10 is reimagining a new world order. And of course, readers will go in and read that chapter. But what is this new world order that you can at least whet listeners' appetites to, Charlotte? This has been discussed. Of course, it's on the back of the U.S. currency, the Federal Reserve note, and certainly George Bush Senior mentioned it in speeches. Many have. I believe Obama's mentioned it. What is this new world order in your view?
Oh, well, my New World Order is a different one than theirs. I got to say that right off the bat. I mean, I'm also the co-author of a book about Nelson Rockefeller and how he built an empire in Latin America. So, with my husband, the main author of the book, it's called "Thy Will Be Done: The Conquest of the Amazon." Nelson Rockefeller and Evangelism in the Age of Oil. So that book explains their concept of a world order. And what they're saying now is, post World War II, we have been able to establish a relative degree of world order. I would dispute that. I would certainly say the war in Vietnam was not a orderly thing without conflict. I would say the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan as well. I mean, the current people that are engaged in this war, do they think we don't have a historical memory? It kind of drives me crazy. But at any rate, I envision a new world that will not be dependent on fossil fuels, and that once that happens, and there will be more development of wind and solar, that we will have less conflict in the world for sure, because these oil wars, they're creating dictators. You know, they're so intent on controlling every aspect of people's lives, including the oil, that it's a very very dangerous phenomenon in my opinion. And I think this war in Ukraine will be a turning point.
Yeah, it seems
people will really start reassessing
Charlotte.
their lives.
You bring up another good point. It seems to be creating. It seems to be centralizing power, doesn't it? It seems to be centralizing power based off of this economic, the backbone of the economic model that the oil is the oil is based on, isn't it?
Yeah,
You're
well, look at Russia. I mean, it's almost totally dependent on oil and natural gas and its exports. I mean, they haven't even sufficiently diversified, but Putin made a calculation that he could fund his military with the oil profits. And of course, this is a dilemma for the West because as long as this goes on, the price of oil is going to be high, and they're going to be profiting on both sides, which makes me think that this conflict is going to go on. They're going to dig in to see who can control the oil and the natural gas, and they won't let the other side, get access. So that's what we're headed for, and I'm just hoping that enough people will see it and say enough already. What are you going to do? You're going to drive us into nuclear war here or World War III? It's very dangerous. So we can only hope that this period will end. I used to think coming out of COVID,
Yeah.
that there would be a sort of a new realignment, a new thinking, even a renaissance. I actually studied art history, if you can believe this, in Florence, Italy, and got my master's degree in there. But one of the things I learned is that the beautiful Renaissance, that it came out of a very medieval time, and it was a response to the Black Death. In other words, people were so appalled at what the Black Death showed, the horrific poverty, the horrific lacking of medicine and health, that they wanted a new society. And that's what I'm hoping for. That's what I was hoping for coming out of COVID. And then all of a sudden we're hit with this war in Ukraine.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people are really upset because they see the terrible tragedy in Ukraine, the people who have been slaughtered,
Right.
and they just don't know what it's all about.
Do
I
you?
don't know. Do you think your listeners share my view that there's some confusion about what this war is all about?
Oh yeah, there's no doubt about it, Charlotte. No doubt about it. I think the people that gravitate to the work that I do, and the people that the work that I do, those that resonate, the information that resonates, these are people that typically will initially start an alternative concept or view as to what the official narrative is. Those are the people that listen to me. That is my audience. And it started for me, Charlotte. It started for me in 2016 when I started talking on Wynwood Radio in Miami, and then that's basically I was invited to talk about my research behind the Zika virus and the controversial pesticide that Rick Scott was allowing what seems to be the CDC and therefore the tie to the World Health Organization to spray on these people. And people were irate about it because it was banned in Europe. It was deemed a neurotoxin. It was known to cause microcephaly. But then the CDC came back to the Miami-Dade people in Miami Beach, where I was at the time, saying that it was totally safe and that it didn't exactly cause microcephaly with all the information and research and otherwise. So I spoke to someone one day, and Kitty was her name. She invited me down to the online radio station, and I began talking about it. And from there, Charlotte, from there, I began talking. I just kind of said, okay, so enough is enough. I'm going to question any government narrative that I find somewhat awkward or fishy, and I'm just going to begin doing it. And so that's how Ray McGovern ended up joining my show, and then that's how Russ Baker ended up joining my show because
good old Russ. I worked on his book on the Bush family. He was one of the researchers on it.
Interesting.
He did a good job, and I'm glad you do that. I wish very few people know about. Most people think of Nelson Rockefeller as the governor of New York, but he was also, during World War II, he was working actually for FDR as the quote-unquote coordinator of inter-American affairs. And his job was to get into Latin America, get rid of the Germans and the Europeans, develop a American empire, win over the military, and in the process he wanted to develop the Amazon. He had a shining dream for developing the Amazon, and we eventually found his connection to our whole story. We wanted to know why indigenous people were being slaughtered, and why certain evangelical missionaries were turning a blind eye to the very people that they were supposedly helping. But we ultimately found the big corporate story behind the whole thing. And once we learned that, I analogize it to climbing a mountain. Once you go to the top of the mountain, and the Rockefellers are at the top, and then you look down, the view is fantastic. You start seeing all these interrelationships. You see where the money is going, and who they're influencing, and the people on the ground aren't even aware of it.
Right. Yeah. Interesting. But I think what do you see now? You see in 2022, you think more Americans are starting to become aware of what might be happening to their country? How do you see the layout of the country right now?
Well, as we all know, there's terrible polarization right now, which is tragic. It's so sad. And on the one hand, I understand the gravitation of a lot of people to someone like Trump. Why? Because he has a way about it. It's like he goes after the suits. He was rejected himself, and so he has a way of winning over loyalty for seeming to stick it to the man, so to speak. But actually, I frankly think Trump is extremely dangerous, and I'm sad to see that happen. On the other hand, there is justifiable suspicion of neoliberalism, frankly, and that's where the Rockefellers reign supreme. These are the people who think that they're going to create a new world order, and I think more people are looking at that, frankly, but I don't know if they're enough. I just can't say. Henry Kissinger, he was Nelson Rockefeller's protege, and then he went on to become Secretary of State, and this highly regarded statesman. He once said, "If you control the oil, you control the world." And he knew, because he worked with Nelson Rockefeller and that whole network. And I think that more people are becoming aware, but not enough. And one of the things I hope to do with my book, Follow the Pipelines,
Yeah.
is to get people even more aware of the insidious role that oil plays in wars. We've heard about climate change, and we've heard about pollution and so on, but it's the war that it fuels that is so serious, and it's all like this network of oil, finance, and military. And you can't distribute oil if you're landlocked except through pipelines. But the big banks won't invest in you unless there's stability. So if you want stability, then you got to send in the military to protect the pipeline route, and you want to make sure that the oil is paid in dollars. And as all of this is going on right now, and it takes some figuring out to be able to know what is happening and how the hell we're going to get out of this. But getting away from oil, I really do believe, is essential.
Charlotte,
long-winded answer.
you're incredibly well researched here, and it sounds like very solidly what you're talking about. As we wind down, and I take up just a few more moments of your time, talk a little bit about how you see Biden dealing with this. Do you think he's doing a good job? Where would the critique be? Where he might be could do a better job? He's trying not to get into a direct conflict, obviously, with Russia, but he's obviously getting congressional approval to send money over to finance this Ukrainian defense against this Russian invasion. What are some further thoughts in regards to how the current
Well,
commander in chief?
What is it? billion in military aid. Oh my God. You know, when you think of where that could have gone, where it could have gone, some of it could have gone. I mean, his whole program, the Build Back Better program that
Yeah.
would have helped people in their communities. Well, forget about that. You know, now it's everything pushing to further militarize Ukraine. So I've been watching it carefully. I think he's under huge pressure. I think he actually wants to diversify away from dependence on fossil fuel, but now he's got this war on his hands and a lot of pressure on him to forget about climate change, go back to drilling, and he's caving to that, frankly, which I'm sorry about. And like, how do we know what he knows? You know,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
feel like the media is not telling us the whole story. That's one thing.
Yeah, for sure.
And you know, the way that they're painting Putin as sort of this wild man, he's very shrewd. So I can't say, I really cannot say yet, but I have a feeling that if this thing goes on much longer, there's going to start to be a lot of questioning of how the Biden administration has handled it and how NATO has handled it. Let's just see what happens. And let's not forget the absolute disasters in Iraq and Afghanistan.
Yeah, yeah. You're right. Yeah, exactly.
Going to be learned.
Right. And what about Charlotte? What are your thoughts on this disinformation department? You think that's appropriate under the Homeland Security?
Oh God, I really can't say. I haven't seen enough on that. The disinformation department. Yeah, I mean it's on both sides. That's the
Sure.
fact.
Yeah.
And I think that the U.S. and its NATO allies have done a better job of it. You know, but you know, Putin saying that it's just what is it, a military operation? I mean, come on, it's an invasion.
It's an invasion, right?
But the other side on how they're painting it, unprovoked. No, I don't agree with that. It's not unprovoked, and that's why I say that once people start to get into the history that led up to this war, I think they're gonna start asking some serious questions of how Biden has handled it.
Good.
And,
excellent.
There's all this talk about genocide, right? That was the pretext that was used by NATO to get involved in Libya. And it wasn't just that genocide had happened. They were worried that genocide was going to happen. And that was the pretext for the U.S. and military to get into Libya and overthrow that regime. So keep your antennas up on this because they're talking about that. They're talking about weapons of mass destruction. Okay, pay attention to that too. It goes on both sides. That's what I'm saying. I sort of say, you know, plague on both your houses. Let's get over this insanity.
Yeah, the polarization.
That's the woman's voice in me, I think.
Follow the pipelines, uncovering the mystery of a lost spy. That's Charlotte's father, and the deadly politics of the great game for oil, which has now been going on for decades. Charlotte, thank you for joining the program. Discuss the truth. Leave listeners with some final thoughts and some final words, if you would.
Do everything you can to find out what's going on. Adopt skepticism on all sides. Try to seek out the people who are trying to tell the truth, and I thank you for having me on this show because that's what I'm trying to do, trying to show what's really going on with Follow the Pipelines. And they can go to Follow the Pipelines website as well. I'm still building it. I'm going to be adding more. I'm going to talk about pipeline wars in other parts of the globe.
Well, it sounds like we've got...
Get informed.
Yeah, get informed. It sounds like we've got a few people that... are somewhat interconnected, especially if you've done research for Russ. So our paths will probably likely cross again, I hope, and I'd like to hear more about your work on Nelson Rockefeller when that's ready to release.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. Well, it's been a real pleasure.
Thank you very much, Charlotte.
Thank you.
So Charlotte Dennett, folks, and you know, New England. She's from New England. I can tell. Just the accent. She sounded a lot to me very similar in the way she spoke and her mannerisms to a woman that I greatly admired, and that was Charlotte Iserbyt. Iserbit, I'd say Iserbit. And Charlotte was one of my first guests within the first year of doing this show. She, of course, exposed the corruption in the Department of Education as having been fired by Ronald Reagan for being opposed to the program betterment of education through science and technology. And she said, frankly, the power was being taken from the organizations like the PTA, the parents, and given to these kind of mega computer algorithmic programs. That's my understanding. I might be off, but whatever her view was, and I'd have to go back and listen to the episode that I did with her 4 years ago, I suppose now. That's what I recall was the issue. Charlotte recently passed away within the past couple months, I believe. And another person that's passed away that is a former guest on the show is Russell Pine, Jordan Maxwell. And the one thing I really like about Jordan, ladies and gentlemen, is Jordan was able to step back from a religious standpoint, a organized religious standpoint, because we have obviously various organized religions. And from the basis of the inception of the United States government in 1776, and even from the sailing of the Mayflower, it was all about the independence, right? The independence, the ability to think freely in regards to definition of God, right? Freedom of religion, the cornerstone of this Constitution um, that Paul Craig Roberts has said on this show that we simply don't have. It's a facade. We think we have it, we don't, and that's maybe very true. Certainly, he would know much more than I do, as having a fellowship from Oxford and from Stanford. But the thing that I liked about Russell, Jordan Maxwell, aka Jordan Maxwell, was that he was able to step back and evaluate interpretation of reality through religion from what he termed, may have been termed by other people, but certainly through him, something called astrotheology, which is basically man's ability to depict um, astrology through their interpretation and refine it scientifically, mathematically. And that type of interpretation is seen through things like geometry, certainly geometry, but I'm thinking of numerology, uh, gematria. This is a mathematical scientific interpretation of the mechanics of the planetary movement and how they equate to our own personal day-to-day life and practices and decisions. Very interesting concept. But anyway, so astrotheology, something that Maxwell spoke about, and he joined the program January 2nd or 3rd, first couple days of the new year of 2020. So it's been over 2 years. But Charlotte Dennett, incredible, obviously a very wise woman, very well researched, and you can find. Please go out and get her book. Follow the Pipelines: Uncovering the Mystery of a Lost Spy and the Deadly Politics of the Great Game for Oil. Unfortunately, her father was, sounds like, killed. He was one of America's top spies, and the first spy of that region. It sounded like. So yes, folks, we have work to do. We have big time work to do. Um, it is appalling to me just how disgusting we have allowed our government to become. And she said it. Charlotte said it very well. It's I don't know if she used the word disgusting, but she used the word polarized. And that's exactly what I feel when you read my book. That is the intent behind these deep state mechanics. They want a divide in this country. They want American pitting themselves against Americans. They want a divide because once there's a divide, then you can create a conflict. Then you can draw a line and you create a conflict. People are forced to take sides. And once you can take sides, then you can move in and you can manipulate the game, if you will, the chessboard. You can manipulate things. That's been happening for quite a while. Fortunately for America, they have been able to see past political differences and say, okay, well, you know what? I will eat my hamburger in front of you, even though you're wearing a Donald Trump hat or whatever it may be. But we're getting dangerously more divided, folks. So stand convicted in your political ground. But what I like to say is this: I like to say it doesn't really matter what political party you're behind because, frankly, I don't care. I don't care if you're Green Party. I don't care if you're Libertarian. I don't. It doesn't make any difference to me what your party is because if you have a resolution that best brings people together in a peaceful manner, that's what's important to me. And therefore, no other form of government or document has done a better job at doing that. And in my view, there's no reason uh, to adjust it. Maybe some amendments, fine, but um, the United States Constitution, the core principles of that, do not need to be touched or even remotely considered changed. And so, if you are supporting those, regardless of your party affiliation, then then you press forward in your work. That's how I see things. People that really need to get past any type of oh you're a Democrat or oh you're a Republican, you're bad, or you're bad because you're this. I mean, have some respect. Have some respect for the Constitution and freedoms and Bill of Rights, the Federalist Papers. Have some respect for what has made this country so great. And unfortunately, yes, it's very unfortunate that the economic machine that it has built itself off of is incredibly corrupt and ties right back to the central banks out of Switzerland and Basel. And um, through my book, I point fingers at the Vatican. I simply do. I simply do. That's what I do through my research. And people can disagree, people can agree, but what is most important, again, is to hold on to those fibers and those principles, those ferocious principles of the United States Constitution, and get past political divide. It doesn't make it shouldn't make a difference. Should make a difference what political party Joe Biden is. The fact that he's now, it seems, was it executive order? I'm not sure. I think it was an executive order. He's now given this guy Alejandro Mayorkas, who I call a Cuban-born Marxist. I'm standing with that until proven wrong. He's now given him the reins over deploying this disinformation department. This is serious. This is serious business here, folks. This is a serious issue. This is a serious issue because what it means is that maybe I'm wrong, but what it means is that big government can now come to a small voice like me, for instance, and say, "Well, you know what, Ian, we think that what you're talking about is misinformation, it's disinformation." Or this author that has just joined me, Charlotte. Charlotte, I think your information is, even though your father went to Harvard, even though Ray McGovern, even though these great people have made comments about your work, even though you've researched for Russ Baker, no, we're going to deem you a disinformation, right? You're part of the disinformation. Therefore, you're harming. You're a harm to your neighbors and your people, and you must be. Well, what's the next step, folks? What you must be removed from society. You must be removed from your community. I mean, give me a break. Is that how far they're willing to go? But you need to catch it now, ladies and gentlemen. You need to catch this right now. You need to call it out. You need to say, no, I've got a problem with that because we have freedom of speech. We have freedom of press. We can speak whatever we like in this country. And until and unless you demand that be enforced, we have major problems here, folks. And that's where I'm just thinking practically. Okay, I never joined the military. I'm really a non-violent person. I'm a very peaceful person. And I think violence is a very weak form of decision making. I just simply do think it is. I've never hurt anybody with any malintent physically at all, ever. And I don't think I ever will. But I will if I have to, and I will defend my right to a Second Amendment because nobody is going to control my speech or my writing or my ability to whatever practice religion freely, which I'm not religious Frankly, I have been at some points in my life, but I'm really not. And I will defend your right to those three things as well. You can stand up on a corner on a public street and public sidewalk and you can say whatever you want. People don't have to listen. They can turn away, they can walk away, they can ignore you. That's your right and that's their right. And I will support and defend your right to do that. So a lot of different dynamics moving in this country today, and I simply do what I feel is my best approach to make and have an effect on people. And I will end again. I will end with this is not about a political party, folks. This is now about your Constitution and your constitutional rights and your Bill of Rights. That's what this is about. So you have to get past the bickering and the divide. You have to move past that, and you have to see the quality, importance of what our founding fathers have handed down to us. You must support that, and you must do that at all costs. And it was Patrick Henry who said this: "Give me liberty, or give me death." It's the way it's going to have to be, folks. Going to have to be able to stand up for yourself, as I am. So let me now leave you again for a second time, but let me leave you with this quote. And the quote is this from an editor. His name is Max Swafford. He's a retired, quote, forensic interviewer and author. In my most recent book, which you can pre order right now at Books A Million, it's listed on Amazon, but you can literally pre order at Books A Million. You go to my website, pre order signed copies. As soon as I get those copies in, I will sign it and ship it off to you. So it's all pre order right now. It does disclose my understanding of the deep state and how I define it. It will be mind stretching for you, is my guess. It will stretch your mind. But this is a very nice quote. I'm leaving you with this on May 11th, 2022. Discussions of Truth. In this riveting new book, No More Lies, Ian Trottier combines radio interviews with his own historical research to create a montage of linkages throughout history that connects the dots between corrupt politicians, shadowy corporations, big tech, big pharma, and dubious international banking magnates. This book portrays the freedom destroying force in this world known as the deep state and calls for the readers to stand up in the defense of freedoms guaranteed by the American Constitution and the Bill of Rights. Donald Trump once described Ian as a prize fighter, and in this amazing work, he is delivering a knockout punch to corruption around the globe. Very nice words that Max had to say, and I thank him for that. And ladies and gentlemen, until next time, be a voice, make a difference, be good to people, and be awesome.